He says the Eurasians are good, kind people. They do not want war. They want peace. He actually begs you to make peace with your brothers of Eurasia.
Hate! 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 Hate!
I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore.
Welcome to Mad as Hell TV. Today we're going to uncover more secrets and lies buried deep inside conspiracies, including one that is hiding in plain sight right above our heads. I'm speaking, of course, of chemtrails. Joining us tonight to discuss this are my co-hosts Clyde Lewis of Ground Zero and Renee Daphne Kimball, an activist and musician. Welcome.
Thank you.
We're going to start out by talking about what these trails are for those few people out there who don't know or haven't noticed them. Let's talk about when you first started seeing them, what they look like.
Well, the thing that we need to say probably at the beginning of this program, because I've heard it all before, is that contrails, condensation trails that come off aircraft, are a normal occurrence. They happen about 40,000 feet, 30, a little higher. They have to have the right weather conditions for them to happen. They fall behind planes and they dissipate quickly. The biggest argument is that there are no chemtrails, which means that these trails that are being left behind by aircraft that spread out do not exist, but we have them on tape, we've shown them, people have seen them, but what's in them? Well, the biggest reports, the first reports to come out of anywhere was the Northwest, Washington, Oregon, places like that, saying that the crops were becoming, they were dying, and the dogs would drink water and they'd have the diarrhea, and certain people would get sick. There was a place in Washington where some trail was left behind by numerous aircraft in the area, and when the trail had fallen on cars, there was some gelatinous globs, they called them globs, that had the consistency of rubber cement and had the smell of human fecal matter. There have been drops of, they call them fecal drops, on homes in Salt Lake City and St. Louis and places like that, wondering what all that stuff is. People have said that there's fuel in these chemtrails and that there are other things such as perhaps drugs or calmatives, or perhaps that they're dropping things on us. And people say, oh, that's impossible. But there is a history of our government, without our knowing, dropping things like cadmium sulfide over the country, creating stillbirths and creating death and creating cancers. Tooele Army Depot in the area of Skull Valley dropped simulants from aircraft over a certain area, killed a number of sheep. In fact, that was the very reason why Stephen King wrote The Stand, because of the fact that he believed that the terror and the death and the threat would come from the air and that it would be sprayed out of airplanes. The new Animatrix has been released right now. It's a supplement to the Matrix movies. In this segment where they're talking about how the machines were destroyed and how the humans wanted to destroy the machines, the first thing they did was they laid a number of chemtrails across the sky before they scorched the sky. So the ideas are in people's heads about the idea that these chemtrails do cause trouble with the ecosystem, they cause trouble in the air, and they're causing people to get very sick.
And I think, Clyde, correct me if I'm wrong, but these are not a phenomena that's been happening for a long period of time. I mean, we've had jets for a great long time, and we've had contrails for a great long time. I remember seeing them a lot of times, but not overwhelmingly all the time. But what you're talking about, the chemtrails, this is something that has occurred, as I understand it, within the past few years.
Maybe, maybe not. And the reason why I say this is because I do know of secret simulant tests that had gone on in the 60s and the 50s, and I think the reason why we're noticing them more now is because of air traffic. Air traffic is, we have a lot more air traffic going on. And so you're noticing this. And how easy is it to hide something like this in plain sight when air traffic is just overwhelming? They could fly something in and you could say, oh, it's just a regular airplane, no, pay no mind to it. When in reality, you've said it, I've seen it, you've seen it. The sun looks like it's in a murky haze.
Yeah, it's
we
got
have all
rings
this
around
pollution in the air, it's got rings around it. It looks like some soup out there.
And the planes are coming from the wrong direction, going at the wrong altitude to be landing at the airport.
Right.
That's what I found that's
and
really
also
weird.
the direction the planes take. I see them going straight up in strange circles and in start and stop. I mean, this is not something that I could see anyone could explain from a normal contrail. I think we have something on the CG, if we could put that up, showing a start and stop of a jet trail. If we could see that, people would get an idea of what we're talking about here. Because there's just no way that a trail, a normal steam trail, will simply stop in the middle of the sky and then start again later on. So that's one of the things I've noticed, and also the strange X patterns and circle patterns.
They do grid patterns as well.
Yeah.
And another thing that people need to realize is that, you know, this chemtrail operation, or contrail, chemtrail, whatever you want to call it, operation, there are simulants and there are aerosolized tests that go on all the time.
All right, what are simulants?
Simulants are simulated diseases. They release simulated diseases and then they can monitor, like for example, they could drop something that would be that would create symptoms of the common cold, so that the Centers for Disease Control can monitor how fast that cold is passing from person to person. They used to have a thing called 1-800-I-GOT-FLU. It was a number you could call, and what happened is whenever they would drop trails in a certain area, the number 1-800-I-GOT-FLU, you'd call it, and then it would give you a speech on, tell us where you got the flu, where are you, and we will send you some information on a new Fluox or whatever they call it, some drug that will help you with the flu. Well, what that does is it goes into a registry, and they'll be able to monitor who got the flu and how fast the simulant had traveled from point A to point B. Why? They want to monitor what would happen if terrorists decided to use some aerosolized drop on the United States. But in the process, people get sick, and some people have allergic reactions, and some people die. And who do they blame? Nobody, because they attribute it to natural causes.
But I mean, the history of the U.S. government doing this goes all the way back to
The 60s.
atom bombs.
Well, sure.
I mean, my dad, I have a paper that was given to my dad that says you were involved in a test in 1951, an atom bomb test, and I've got a picture of his ship, and it's in the middle of a big mushroom cloud with about 10 other ships. So this is not
And you
something
told him
that's
afterwards, or
Oh yeah, they told him. They told him in 1958. They sent the letter out.
Tuskegee, Alabama. What did they do? They injected black men with syphilis just to see what it would do to them.
Right. So there's a history of
There's a history of testing
our
people using,
using us.
types of simulants, sometimes even real diseases, to monitor what's going on. They also use the threats of diseases, for example, SARS. We're beginning to realize that SARS was the simulation, and the monkeypox is now the real thing. Monkeypox is spreading a lot faster than SARS ever did, but it's something to alarm the people so they can be ready for something more. And it's been happening. I mean, everything's prelude. I can show you in history where even 9/11 was reenacted in Russia and Chechnya and places like that, even before it happened in New York. So when you're looking up in the sky and you're seeing these chemtrails, what are you hearing now? You're hearing that Iraq and possibly other terrorist nations have the ability to fly UAVs, unmanned aerial vehicles, into areas and drop aerosolized biological weapons. So they're talking about aerosolized biological weapons from the Iraqi side of the fence, when
And
in
they're already
reality,
doing it.
they've been testing these simulated aerosolized biological weapons for years prior to the terrorist wars.
Now, what did the Iraqis do with those weapons? Did they hide them with the rest of those weather weapons that we can't find?
Oh, yeah. See, that's the thing.
They're
is that
very clever, aren't
for
they?
some
in
reason,
hiding
Yeah.
we've been warning
very
people
interesting
of
how they
these
did that.
chemtrails, and people say, oh, the chemtrails don't exist. So why is it then we're fearful of UAVs? Why are we fearful of these UAVs dropping aerosolized bioweapons on us? Because they were testing them prior to the terrorism war.
And also they conditioned us to be afraid.
Sure.
It's nothing but a long-going series of ways to be fearful. All you have to do is look at the news. It's nothing but a panoply of things that you should be afraid of. how you should not talk to your neighbor, how you should not get involved in community, how you should not go to malls, how you should not do anything that's going to foster communication or community.
So when you look at the chemtrails and you say to yourself, the chemtrails, I see them, but nobody else believes me, point to the fact that if chemtrails are non-existent, if the idea of using chemical trails to drop significant loads of biochemical weapons on a populace, if using an aerosolized chemtrail is not the way to do it, then why do they warn us of unmarked aerial vehicles or unmanned aerial vehicles flying over our cities that Iraq unleashes to drop these biological aerosolized weapons on us? Why do they tell us
How
about
are
it?
they going to convince us, though, that Iraq is doing it? I would think they'd have to pick another country now.
The same way they convinced us that Saddam Hussein rammed those
Well,
buildings.
yeah, but
into
we
them,
know now
rammed those
that
planes
he
into
has no
buildings.
weapons left because they're missing, and they don't have any army left. So
No, the beauty is we don't know.
they're just going to convince us again that this
Sure.
Yeah.
poor, desiccated
Of course,
And when
we
you're
say-
afraid, you'll believe anything.
That's right, and if you keep saying a lie
repeat it
enough
Yeah,
times,
right.
no matter how bizarre it is, people are going to believe it. And what do people believe? The thing that I found what people do is they take a concept, they hear it one time, regardless of whether it's corrected later, they're going to carry that
That's
concept
true.
forward.
Just like
they're
they
going to
believe
keep it
that there's
going.
a connection with 9/11 and Al Qaeda.
Mhm.
That was
Regardless
repeated.
of what you
Even though
say
it was
to
not said
correct it.
directly, it was alluded to.
And the idea that Osama bin Laden supported Saddam Hussein, which is a lie. That
Mm-hmm.
never happened. Osama bin Laden never supported Saddam Hussein. And the lie that there's weapons of mass destruction. And the lie that we were going to go in and take Iraq with no problems. You know, it's funny. You look at the war the way it's been. It's the spring break war. Over the spring break, we sent all of our boys over to fight our battles for us. At the end of it all, our great fearless leader came down out of an airplane and landed on an aircraft carrier to tell us, oh, it's all good and fine. Let's go back to being happy. Well, you know what? There are men, our boys, dying in Iraq now. We're hearing about it every day. There are innocent people in Iraq that are being liberated. Yeah, I can tell you that liberation comes with a bullet. You get to leave this planet, which is just nothing but a hellhole created by a bunch of leaders who are full of themselves.
Right, and maybe the rest of us are so saturated with chemtrails that our minds aren't working that well.
There was a group out of
So-
Germany called the
That's one
Sunshine
of my
Project.
concerns. Is this kind of a fog
What is
over
it?
everyone.
And my favorite position is, if it's so innocent, if it's just contrails, then why don't you front up and say where it's coming from, who's doing it, and why it's happening?
Or why does the weather reporter every day say bright, sunny skies, sudden clouds in the sky today? Where'd the sudden clouds come from?
Especially when they're
They came
drippy.
from the trails.
They come
so,
600 miles from their origination.
I mean,
Chemtrails can be made 600 miles away and they can develop into thunderstorms in a matter of minutes. Now that's interesting, isn't
Really?
it? What kind of stuff are they putting in those chemtrails to cause that? Perhaps aluminum? Perhaps
well,
barium?
there have been rainwater sampling
I
tests
mean-
done by very many people actually across the country.
You got these harsh metals going into your rainwater, you got these harsh metals going into chemtrails. In fact, I've talked with military who have told me that they've had to make mixtures of something called panther piss. That's what they called it. They called it panther piss. And they put it in the planes and they dropped it over cities. And it was a mixture of fuels. And
Did they know why they were doing that?
to burn better,
To burn
allegedly.
Allegedly.
They're supposed to burn
Okay.
better, and but what it does cause, it causes more particulate in the air. And it gets into your lungs, and that's why
Right.
people are dying of respiratory
Well,
illnesses.
and you see, right
Right.
there, why doesn't the EPA examine this? Because they have said that very small particulates, no matter how toxic or not, cause damage to the body. They've already said that.
Yeah, but they're not going to. That's the whole
Do you want to
problem.
get in? You want to get in the way of an airline or an airline industry that's failing anyway? I mean, we're already having problems with the airline industry now. Can you imagine what would happen if the EPA did a study? It's all about money. It's all about greed. It's all keeping it quiet because nobody wants to lose their ass. Nobody wants. I mean, we're living in times right now where you're either making it or you're not making it.
Yes, and the haves and has not, the chasm is growing.
Yes. And if you're not making it, you're probably getting sick and you don't have insurance to treat it anyway. So it's the culling of the world. It's
There
the
we
culling
go,
of the
population
nation.
control.
Yep.
Well,
It's
that's
a very frightening thought, but it's just, you know, what's frustrating for me, and I'm sure you can relate to this too, both of you, is when you talk to people about it, they don't say, they just think you're a little bit crazy or you're just paranoid. And to me, it's just so
Right.
obvious.
Well, the perfect example was Ask Umbra on the GRIST environmental newsletter that goes out. This is a hardcore, very dynamic activist newsletter, and she answered what are these trails in the sky, and she gave the classic example
Just
of they're just
contrails.
contrails, don't worry
Right.
about them. nothing to worry about
Well,
at
none
all.
of the environmental groups have been willing to step forward and even look at this. I know different people have asked Greenpeace, you know, they've asked the Sierra Club, they've asked many environmental groups to examine it, and they've all rejected it. They've all said, no, we can't get into that.
Well, NASA was investigating it
yeah.
for weather problems.
Yeah, you were saying that.
NASA was looking at it as air traffic, increased air traffic, causing problems with the weather, maybe causing problems with all kinds of other situations, poor visibility, low ceilings, that sort of thing. And they were saying that that the increased air traffic in this country has caused different weather patterns and strange weather patterns. It was then that the Air Force or the military created something called Force Multiplier, which is Force Multiplier 2025, basically saying that by the year 2025 they'll be able to control the weather using means such as sprays and things of that nature to change the way our weather patterns are. And that's where you find your connections with HARP and other types of technology, because if you can control the weather, you basically can win a war. Because you can cause earthquakes, you can cause...
you wouldn't even have to fight.
No, you wouldn't have to fight.
No, you wouldn't.
And that's one of the things a lot of people were speculating about before the Iraq War, was there was a huge sandstorm beforehand, making people wonder if they were using weather control for that little situation. I mean, you can cause a whole place to just starve to death by changing just one little element, and you could have drought for like 10 years.
But do you think they really understand the repercussions of all this?
Oh,
Of course they don't.
I don't think they even have a remotest clue as to
It's like
what
just
the
playing with toys. So
yeah,
let's
well,
play and see.
they look at the one little ramification that they can see here, and they forget about everything else that might happen along. It's like biotechnology. It's the same kind of mentality.
When they set off the atomic bomb, I remember Oppenheimer was saying something to the effect that they didn't even know what the after effect would be. When they set it off, they just did it because they felt they had to. So if it would have blown up the entire world, that would have been the end of us. So when the first bomb went up,
consciousness, isn't it?
yeah, it's a strange way of thinking. It's like, well,
you were saying
power
the
is
other
very
day on your
weird.
show that kind of thinking is alien.
yes, it is.
And I kind of understand what he's saying when he says that,
Yeah.
because it doesn't seem like a human being with a heart and soul could think like that.
But see, there are a lot of people who believe in opening Pandora's box. A lot of people who think they got to get that ball in motion. There are people who believe that it's their destiny to push us towards something that needs to be fulfilled. There's that thought going around that George Bush believes that his destiny is to bring us to the second coming of Jesus Christ. Well, if so be it, they'll have to orchestrate it if it's going to happen.
Or else he's part of a secret society that's pushing a new world order.
Sure.
So it could be that as well.
And there's
Yeah.
also, I think there's also the element of power. Power is a very strange thing.
Aphrodisiac.
And it makes people really, really weird. And then nobody gets to be a total weird, sadomasochistic, sexual deviant who murders people overnight. They get there by degrees. And I think that part of this is the degrees, bit by bit. They're getting a little bit, oh, well, what if we do this, and what if we do that, and then we can do this, and then we can do that.
It's not just limited to people in power either. There are
No.
there are certain degrees that we accept as well. Certain degrees where we say, go and kill the bastards. Certain degrees where we say, go and hang the guy that was in jail. Certain degrees where we say, well, I don't care if he lives or dies. That's the kind of thing, that's the kind of mentality that's being engendered in the American people now.
Right.
But it's being
We're-
engendered.
Well, we're having this engendered intolerance that's happening. You listen to country music now, it has nothing to do with country music. It has everything to do with, there's this #1 song on right now by Toby Keith and Willie Nelson called Whiskey for My Men and Beer for My Horses. That whole song is about going out and being a vigilante and hanging people in the streets if they commit crimes. I mean, they are promoting the idea of just killing at will, without any trial, without any
Right.
introspection, without anything. It's time to start killing people because we have been waiting all this time. We've been nice, we've been this diplomatic nation. Well, that time is over. We need to kill now. That's the message that's being sent out.
And I think it's a very easy message for people to pick up on, because when I came back from Australia in 1992, the thing that disturbed me the most here was this apparent political correctness where everybody was held in very tightly secure in being very nice to each other and very polite. And underneath was this seething anger that, when it pinched through the surface, exploded.
Actually, I'm against political correctness because I'd rather have somebody talk to me on their level, and if they're a racist, that way I know who they are, rather
Exactly.
than hiding behind some
Right.
political correct jargon. I mean, I
You don't know
despise
where
people who
people are.
call it the N-word, because the N-word is there for a reason. It's there to point out who the racists are. It's there to point out who the bigots are. It's there to point out who has the prejudice. You know, there's a lot of reasons why those words exist, because they demonstrate and they show just who you're dealing with.
So with all this evidence of what the government is and what it does and what it's trying to do, Do you feel chemtrails are manipulating us into a situation?
There's a website called the Sunshine Group. Operation Sunshine is out of Germany, and they did some investigations into something known as calmatives. And the idea is that they sprayed the populace before 9/11 and after 9/11 with calmatives to keep the nation pretty much in a state of apathy, and basically keep them in a state of accepting. It's a gradual grooming process, so they can keep us all calm in this crisis, because a lot of people believe that, you know, if it were several years ago when this happened, there would be riots in the streets and civil war. We managed to keep civil war at bay, but there still is that underlying current of who's a traitor and who's not a traitor, who's sticking up for the country, who's not sticking up for the country. It's this bumper sticker patriotism where we're being told these colors don't run, and, you know, burn this
Pray
flag,
for our
and
troops.
pray for the troops, all this stuff. You know, it doesn't fly anymore, not when we're lied to. And how many lies, you know, when the lies are finished, or, you know, when is the truth coming out? I mean, you can't believe anything now. I mean,
That's
not from
very
Clinton,
difficult.
not from Bush, not from any of them. You can't believe any of them,
No,
because you know the histories. And
know
when,
that.
when people hear me talk about Bush on my show, they say, oh, you just hate President Bush. No, I don't hate President Bush. I just hate what he stands for. And I hate what Clinton stood for. And I hate what Reagan stand for. I hate what this country is standing for these days. It's standing for intolerance, and it's standing for ridicule of people that have something they want to tell. Like, for example, the chemtrail thing. You know, they don't assess anymore. They believe what comes out of CNN. They believe what comes out of Murdoch.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, they believe. I mean, Rupert Murdoch has this control over everybody's minds in Fox Network. You have Bill O'Reilly and all Sean Hannity and all these other idiots that are on just basically parroting the company line. You have, and you know,
They have more control now because of the recent FCC decision, which
Sure.
we can only hope that our Congress will step up to the plate and try and reverse that decision.
yeah.
There's always hope, isn't there?
There's always hope, however slim and tiny it may be.
That's right. So at least we have these airwaves right now, though, to tell the people about chemtrails. And one of the things I want to mention is that the Air Force continues to say that the major media, all the major media, has exposed the chemtrail story, and exposed it as a hoax, which I just went, they think I'm the major media, I guess, because I don't see any major media revealing chemtrail stories, do you?
No, they're not. And you know, the Air Force also told us that dummies were dropped at Roswell in 1947, when the program didn't start until 1956. You know, the Air Force has lied. They've lied many
routinely
times.
lie.
They routinely lie to us.
Yeah.
The government lies. We're not expecting them to tell us the whole truth. I mean, if they were to tell us the truth about everything, I don't think that we'd want to walk out of our homes. But I think that blatant lies, and then what adds insult to injury is they lie to us, and then when people try to expose the truth, they're laughed at. And the government encourages the laughing, and, and the media encourages the laughing of it. And instead of investigating it and giving it the respect of investigation, they immediately ridicule and poo-poo those who want to point out that there's some inconsistencies.
Right.
I don't know how many times that we have been wanting an investigation into 9/11, and that investigation has been held up. Why? I don't know. It was the biggest crime committed in the century. Why is there no investigation? Because we already know what happened, allegedly. We already know that. We already know the story and who was responsible. And,
Well, they're going to try and keep it quiet until the election, probably, I think.
Sure.
Right. And I think that it's the same with the chemtrails. I don't think they want an investigation to come out, because then that means that somebody somewhere in the government is going to have to do some explaining somehow, some way.
Unless
and no
it's
matter,
not government.
Well, that's true.
Could be private. That's another thing that people
Yeah.
always think about. This could be a private organization.
Yeah.
Well, you know, I've seen photos, and I myself have taken photos of tanker jets. They're not commercial airlines.
No.
I mean,
and they don't
some
have
of
any
them may
markings.
be, but there's a lot of military involved in this. And we were talking about HARP earlier. Now, that's a military installation.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe that HARP is probably connected to this in some way, though I couldn't explain all of how it is.
Right.
But we know that is something, and that's a difficult thing to explain right there. I mean, you're talking about something that basically shoots beams into the ionosphere and cooks it.
Yes, yes.
And they can use it to transmit signals
It's
and
an ionic
energy.
heater. It's an ionospheric heater, and then they use it so they can broadcast over it. Creates an auroral effect. That's why they call it the auroral. The A, one of the A's stands for auroral, hyperactive auroral research project or something like that. That's what they call it. And that HARP, you know, it's one of those things that if you talk about it, people go, "What?"
Right, exactly.
See,
Yeah.
because it's
No
not a
one
part.
has
It's
any
not a part of the
idea.
mainstream reporting.
Exactly.
It's not a part of your mainstream consciousness. So if someone says HARP, they're either tuning out or they go, "I don't get this."
Right.
And I think that, in fact, I was explaining this to, I was speaking at the UFO Museum today that's just opened in Portland, and I had told them, I said, a lot of the times people who are in this field of investigation and study, they always tend to take for granted that people are aware of what we're talking about. And in reality, they don't know.
Mm-hmm.
We need to start understanding that, you know, this is primary for them. This is preschool.
Right.
A lot of people aren't into studying this kind of thing. A lot of people are mainstream, and they're being duped. They're being told what to believe and what to think.
And they're also too busy to look up.
Yeah.
Basically.
Well,
They're
you know,
just
that's
kept
the
too
thing. I've
busy.
noticed people when they walk, they tend to look at the ground.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure I do it myself sometimes, but I've noticed that that's a pattern, and you certainly can't see what's going on if you're looking at the ground.
Mm-hmm.
It's not going to happen.
Right.
They're thinking about what they have to do in the next 10 minutes and
Right.
and
So
the
we've pretty much
myriad of
covered a
things.
little bit about the appearance of these trails, and we're going to take a break right now and hear Renee sing a song about chemtrails. Renee Daphne Kimball, who is the Worm Diva from Enough, the planet's favorite band. So stay tuned, we'll be right back.
When you see several dozen trails from jets up in the blue, do you want to ask what could it be? They are spraying down on you. Toxic trails to you. We don't know what they are. Toxic trails to you. Are they innocent or something quite bizarre? Some say that mind control is what they're doing, or deadly cocktails of disease they're brewing. Toxic trails to you, but we don't know what they are. Toxic trails to you. They're filling up our sky. Toxic trails to you. Will we find out what they are before we die? The law won't regulate what's falling on your head, but they'll regulate our ashes when we're dead. Now just think about it. When you see all of those trails up in the sky, do you ever wonder why they seem to last so long? I mean, if they were ice crystals or vapor trails, wouldn't they just last a couple of hours? Maybe there's something else. But why don't they tell us what it is? And just who are they anyway? The planes don't seem to have any markings on them. Gee, I don't know, all those trails up in the sky making big, drippy things across our sky, and all those big circles around the sun. If it's all so innocent, then why don't they tell us what it is? Toxic trails to you. They're in the skies again. Toxic trails to you. They're messing with your health and with your brain. They say they're testing patterns for the weather. I guess they think that we are not too clever. Toxic trails to you, 'cause they're in the skies again.
Mad as Hell TV.
Welcome back. We're going to continue with our discussion of chemtrails. Right now, let's talk about some of the possible motivations for these trails. I know we haven't had any, we don't have the ear of the military or whoever's doing this, so we can't really ask them
That's
directly.
true.
But we have a lot of anecdotal evidence and connect the dots. So let's talk about that.
First motive, and I know this for a fact.
Okay.
There were chemtrail operations being done in Utah before the Olympics, the Winter Olympics. The reason why is because they were thinking to themselves there may be a terrorist attack on the Olympics. So what they did, since Utah is in a bowl, it's a valley, very deep valley, and that if any kind of biological threat was released in Utah, in Salt Lake City and Salt Lake Valley, it would stay there for a long period of time. So what they did is they did simulated tests. Known fact that they did simulated tests over the Olympics when they were in Sydney. So we're looking at, and that's when a lot of Australians started saying they were seeing chemtrails. So motive, to test the waters for future terrorist attacks, maybe even to create weapons that can be dropped from certain altitudes. I find it interesting that Atta, when he was looking for, I don't know if it was Atta or it was one other terrorist, he wanted to buy an airplane that he wanted to take out all the seats and put a sprayer in so he could go in and spray like a duster, like dusting crops. He wanted to spray people with biological weapons. Very easy to do. It's all preparatory for some big terrorist attack. And when people say, look, it's in the trails, it's in the trails, there are a lot of people that won't believe it. And those who know, well, hopefully they'll be able to protect themselves, and those who don't, well, c'est la vie.
What do you think, Renee? What have you
Well,
gathered?
one of the things that I've seen on the internet was I happened to lob into some government site, and they said that they were testing patterns of the weather, which, I don't know, it didn't sound too terribly logical to me because it seemed like they were just doing it too often, too much, and in too many places, so I didn't really buy it. So testing patterns for the weather didn't seem to come out too clean with me. And then what you said later, that they said that they were interfering with the weather, so it can't be
Well,
both.
there may be something, you may have something that could be a binary weapon.
Explain to us what that means. What
Well,
does binary mean?
A binary weapon means you have one part chemtrail, one part something else
So it's a
together.
dual focus,
It's a
you
dual
mean?
focus type. It's
I
a
see,
dual
right.
whammy. You've got a weapon or a silent weapon that's being used by the military as a possible carrier for some disease, possible testing. They can monitor the movements of these things, find out where they're going, whether or not they can stay in the air for long periods of time.
Right.
They can monitor it to see if the weather has any effect on it or what the weather has to do with it. Or they can use them to control the weather. They can use them to create tornadoes in places where tornadoes don't happen. They can use it to create rainfall in places where rainfall doesn't happen. The idea of weather modification is not too far-fetched when you consider they've been cloud seeding for long periods of time. We'll say, what is cloud seeding? Nothing more than dropping iodide out of a plane in an aerosolized form, going into a cloud. So if the idea of dropping something from an aircraft to manipulate or change something is so far-fetched, then why don't we go back to cloud seeding and tell them they're liars too? So the idea here is that it could be weather control, it could be population control, it could be a number of things. It could be dropping fuel over populated areas because they don't know where they're going to dump the fuel, so they have to dump it high in the sky and people feel the effects from it and no one will know the difference. There's so many things that it could be. That's why it needs to be investigated. We don't need to, we don't have to allow ourselves into thinking that perhaps it's the government when private organizations are just as capable of polluting, and they've always been polluters from the very beginning.
As I understand it, the airport that's just south of here is a private airport where a lot of the stuff seems to be coming from. It comes from that direction around McMinnville. And it certainly doesn't fly down toward the airport. It's flying up over the airport. So it doesn't seem to me that like they're going to be landing. And one of the things that I've noticed is there was a particularly bad series of them last summer. And all three of us in our household, my mother, my husband, and I, all three of us got nosebleeds at three separate times.
Yes, I've
Now,
read
one
about that.
person getting nosebleed in a household, okay. Two people, maybe, but all three getting nosebleeds.
This was after a heavy spray?
Yeah, at the same time. What's this? And I've never gotten nosebleeds until I came to the Northwest in my life. This is the first time I have ever had nosebleeds, and I get them on a regular basis.
And this could also be an allergic reaction to something they're dropping out of the sky, getting into the rainwater, getting into, if there are carcinogens in these trails, then they are chemtrails and they are deadly. The condensation trails, no. I mean, they're normal. But if there's something falling out of a plane, or there's some exhaust that's coming out of a plane, or if there's something that's burning off of a plane that's not supposed to be burning off, then we do have a problem. We need to investigate it. The only problem is that there are so many people out there that have cried out and rang the bell that, everybody stands there and says, well, not everything can be true. Not everything can be right. And so we have to be, a lot of times we have to be careful about what we release and what we don't release.
Right.
There is some sort of a pattern and timing to what we release. I remember the first scare of chemtrails came about because soldiers, when they were in the Gulf, said that they were seeing this happening. And so the sicknesses that some people were having here in the United States, in the Northwest, mind you, were the same types of diseases that the Gulf War veterans were getting. And so they suspected only that maybe there was something that they were exposed to and that we were exposed to at the same time, and that perhaps the government was behind it. Or, like I said, you know, many times we throw the idea out that the government is behind every evil thing that goes on in this country, when in reality that we tend to forget about the private organizations and commerce that does a lot of evil things to people as well.
More and more the industry and business are united.
Well, yeah.
They're kind of merged.
Mm-hmm.
But I want to also mention there have been quite a few studies that have shown the presence of barium and aluminum.
Mm-hmm.
And we know those are both heavy metals. And we know for a fact that aluminum does interfere with brain activity.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, causes Alzheimer's. So I think that, you know, that we have to consider mind control in this, and possibly that it's being used as a psychotronic weapon.
When you were looking at aluminum being used, it also not only hampers brain function, but barium and several other heavy metals also hamper digestive functions. They hamper respiratory,
yes,
digestive,
right.
and also mental. It also can get into the endocrine system, the adrenal glands and the thyroid and that sort of thing can cause problems there. And I've been noticing on television, it's really interesting, but you know, all of the things that chemtrails are known to attack, if they, you know, that if the things exist, if the idea that these diseases and all these horrible things, you know, barium and aluminum exist, all the things that you see on TV being advertised to help you, Prozac, you know, Prilosec.
They create the problem
symptoms.
and
Yeah.
then the cure.
Yeah,
It's called
Lipitor, all those
problem.
things.
Right.
Yeah.
Problem solution.
Yeah, and so all these drugs that they're selling on the market are drugs that are there to treat. You know, why is it there's all sorts of new acid reflux cases?
Right.
Why does everybody have acid reflux?
And so many children have asthma.
Yeah, why is it?
That's amazing to me how many kids have asthma.
Right.
When
Yeah.
when I was growing up, I was a severe asthmatic, and I did not meet another person with asthma, and I lived in Southern California in the LA
And
area
smog. Yeah.
until I was 17 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And now every kid on the block has got asthma. What's with this?
Yeah.
And air pollution is supposed to be better.
Mm-hmm.
So I really have a problem with some of the things that are happening.
You
with
also look at
people.
weather situations now. Storms have been more intensified than before. Tornadoes have touched down and they've had some winds as high as 300 to 400 miles per hour. Do you know what happens when wind blows at 300, 400 miles per hour? It literally tears the asphalt up off the streets. So if you have a tornado that's coming down the road, that's tearing up your asphalt, you know damn good and well that you're dead. Tornadoes happening in places that don't normally have tornadoes. Salt Lake City, Utah, August 11th, 1999. An F5 tornado touched down in the middle of Salt Lake City and ripped through the whole area of downtown. Tornadoes don't touch down in Salt Lake City, and they're not F5s. Why is it that happened? A tornado touched down in Cyprus. Tornadoes don't touch down in Cyprus. There are no tornadoes in Cyprus. We've had funnel clouds in Oregon. Funnel clouds are almost a rarity here. You know, funnel clouds and tornadoes are rarities in Oregon. Why are all these storms intense? Because maybe we're tampering with the weather and we're doing things that we shouldn't be doing.
Well, the Air Force says right on their webpage that they are planning to own the weather by 2025, so it isn't exactly, that part isn't covert.
Own
Right.
the
It's
weather.
just how they're doing it that we're debating.
Sure.
And we're debating it because we're just tired of looking at this sky and seeing very odd and bizarre things that don't add up.
Who'd ever
They just
thought
don't
that you'd
add
wake up and hear on the news that Virginia had an earthquake, a 4.5 or a 5.5
Really?
Virginia.
Right.
Virginia having an earthquake. What faults are in Virginia? Not many. You know, the day that we hear about, you know, tidal waves and things of that nature, you know, that are happening is commonplace. Storms that happen in areas that don't normally have snow. In fact, they had snow in Florida, I think it was last year. Frost in Florida, snow falling in Florida, snow in California. I remember I went to Las Vegas, I think it was 3 or 4 years ago I went to Las Vegas. The temperature was 20 degrees in Vegas. Nobody was outside. All the casinos were full of people in long coats. Some people even had their shorts on thinking it was going to be a warmer time, and it wasn't.
Right.
So what does that tell
It
you?
might be tied to global warming.
And there's so many
I think
ways
if it's
you can-
cold, it's not global warming.
Yeah, well, you never know. It
Well,
could swing either way.
I think that,
with
yeah,
cold.
they've shown
They're
that,
not
but-
quite sure.
But one of the theories about this is that according to one of the researchers, Will Thomas, is that whoever's doing this is to control global warming. In other words, that the global warming is so expensive to the insurance companies and the banks that they will do this temporary Band-Aid type operation
Right.
in order to control
Yeah,
the warming
that's
of the
something I've
planet.
heard. And it's true
So,
that during the
could be.
summertime, during some of the hottest days, there
They
were
do spray.
dozens
Right.
of trails in the
And it's
sky
cool
that
the next
created
day.
they created a cloud
Yeah.
sheet, and it
That just
cooled
happened
everything
last
down.
week. It was 98 degrees on Friday. It was like 92 on Saturday, and they sprayed like mad And the next day it was very cool.
It has also been speculated that chemtrails are being used as covers for transporting aircraft that the people shouldn't be seeing.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Oh, that's an interesting one. I haven't heard that one.
That when they lay a blanket of clouds over an area, you can't see the aircraft that they're flying overhead. So there
That's
may be
true.
exotic aircraft that they're trying to fly over that you don't know. You think, oh, it's a jet, when in reality it's something else. Or it's something that they
Right.
don't want you to see. How do they do tests over urban areas? And why do people see UFOs? Well, you see something in the chemtrail and you're going, wow, I've never seen anything like that before. That's because the chemtrail is being used, or the contrail, or whatever it is, is blanketing the sky so you don't see the movement of these exotic aircraft or these test aircraft. And but you hear them, and some people do see them through the clouds, but then they look up and they say, oh, I see extraterrestrials piloting aircraft, when in reality it's the Air Force, or it's the military, or some other organization moving aircraft through the sky that you're not supposed to be seeing.
Right, and you just happen to be in the wrong spot at the wrong time to see it.
Yeah, in fact, Frank, the guy who is one of our producers here, showed me a picture of a delta-shaped cloud. It's a chemtrail coming down out of a chemtrail. And I'm thinking to myself, boy, it's delta-shaped, it's huge. It must be a UFO of some kind. You never know. You never know what they're using to pilot this stuff through. And you know, it hides a lot. You look up in the sky, you see nothing. You know, things could be going on up the sky, you wouldn't even know what's going on up there.
I know that they do, the different clouds appear differently, which seems rather odd to me. I mean, when a cloud disperses, it usually disperses in particular kinds of patterns, according to the education I got in school. But some of this stuff is, they're drippy clouds, clouds that look like, you know, kerosene on a window. I mean, what kind of a cloud is that?
And also the way, even when there's wind, they just stay there. Like, it looks almost like a sticky web.
Yes.
I have pictures of that, which we'll see. And it doesn't move. It's like, you know, cloud shifts with the wind. I think you can say that's a physical fact.
Right.
And this stuff does not move.
Right.
And also the other strange thing is the nodules that come off these trails. They're all the same. Every one looks exactly the same. They have these thick nodules. And you get a really tight close-up shot, and it almost looks like some kind of petroleum or
Or
it
oil.
looks oily. It does look oily.
Yeah.
It does look oily.
And the other thing is that some of these trails, you don't see them in some countries. Like, they haven't been reported yet in certain South American countries, like Mexico. Mexico is not South American, but south of the equator, they haven't seen quite a few of these trails, or in Russia or China. So they're in the Allied countries, though. Reportings are all in the Allied countries. So if they're not real, why do these other countries that have just as many jet planes as we do never see chemtrails?
There was one place that saw chemtrails, though. Belgrade. They reported them from Belgrade, Yugoslavia. They were seeing them before the wars happened. So obviously,
just for a certain a period of time now, like
before the attacks happened, they saw chemtrails over the area. So what did that tell me? That tells me that perhaps they used it as a cover so they could bring planes in, and also other things. You hear them in the sky, but you can't see them.
And also, like you were saying, the calmative effect. There could be something in it. But one thing that's kind of a breakthrough is, and it might be a mild one, but it's could offer some hope, is that people may not know that Representative Dennis Kucinich has legislation that he's proposed in the House to ban weapons in space. And one of the clauses in that bill is to ban chemtrails. Now, I realize that later this was taken out of the bill, and some people have speculated that, well, that means that it wasn't supposed to be there. But I asked him myself, and several other reporters asked him as well, and he said, no, the chemtrails are still in the bill, and they are outlawed. He's planning to outlaw them. And he admitted in a recent campaign tour in San Jose, California, he said this, chemtrails are real. Now, this is someone who represents us in the U.S. House of Representatives, so that's at least a breakthrough in terms of getting the information out to people. And, you know, anyone who is following this story and who happens to meet with Mr. Kucinich, Representative Kucinich, I recommend they ask him again and get it on tape as much as possible.
And is he the first person that you know of who's actually come out and...
An official that I know of. Now, there's others that have been reported. This is someone I spoke to myself, so I can say I know this happened. There have been reports of air traffic controllers saying that there is a military operation. This has been reported through Will Thomas, and I think maybe another reporter as well. So those are the only two that I know about. And I think there was a Canadian Air Force air traffic controller and one in the Northeast. But those are, like I say, coming through other sources. Kucinich is someone I actually spoke to. But I myself, and along with Nancy Newell, who's been working on this with me, went to visit our local county health department and asked for an investigation, gave them all the materials we have, and of course we have not heard anything
Right.
back.
Well,
So
It's
that's
shut
kind of,
down.
we've been what do you call it, stonewalled.
Yes.
And we're not the only ones.
Right.
People across the country have had the same experience trying to get the EPA to look at their samples, trying to get any kind of response from their congressmen who keep writing them back and saying, well, the Air Force says there's nothing to it. So that's where it ends. But anyway, I think we're starting to get to the end of our show here. So I want to thank our guests, the crew, and all of you for joining us on Mad as Hell TV. And remember to stand up for your civil liberties on Monday, June 30th, when the Portland Bill of Rights Committee will present a forum on protecting civil liberties from the war on terrorism. Check for time, location, and contact information on your screen. If you have any comments, email them to the producer. That email will be on the screen as well. And be sure to stay tuned for Clyde's spin on the No Spin News. Thanks, and so long for now.
The plan also reportedly calls for the swift seizure of forward bases inside Iraqi territory.
Saddam Hussein has gone to elaborate lengths, spent enormous sums, taken great risks to build and keep weapons of mass destruction.
Simply stated, there is no doubt that Saddam Hussein now has weapons of mass destruction.
We know that Saddam Hussein is determined to keep his weapons of mass destruction.
He has stockpiles of chemical and biological weapons, and he is aggressively pursuing nuclear weapons.
Saddam Hussein's pursuit of weapons of mass destruction poses a grave danger.
This is the voice of your conscience. It's time to wake up from your primetime stupor. Emerge from the morass of mainstream mediocrity and misinformation. Rise up now and tune into Mad as Hell TV. I'm Clyde Lewis with the Mad as Hell TV spin on the No Spin News. Be careful who you call a traitor. When we spoke against the war, you called us traitors. You told us that we had forgotten about the tragic events of September 11th. You told us that we were encouraging another attack. You told us that protesters were sympathizing with terrorists. But you never proved a link between Iraq and September the 11th. In fact, the only concrete link you've ever proven was the money trail from the Saudi royal family to Al-Qaeda. But it's okay if the president chooses to ignore the Saudis' culpability. Good little Americans should lockstep behind him. We heard the word traitor like it was thrown around like a dirty shirt. I said, let the inspections play out, let them continue. But no, you said enough was enough. You told me Saddam was building this apocalyptic arsenal, that he had VX and sarin and anthrax and mustard gas, salmonella, even the cooties. You told me he was capable of launching a biological attack at the drop of a hat. You told me he presented a clear and imminent threat to my security. You told me to gift wrap my house in saran wrap and duct tape. You told us that we'd march right into Baghdad and find all of these horrible weapons. And you told us that they'd have inscriptions written on them. Inscriptions written in French and German and Russian and Chinese, maybe even in Pig Latin, because hell, they were against us too, weren't they? You told us the evidence was overwhelming. You showed us this graphic drawing of an 18-wheeler and explained that it was overwhelming proof that we were facing the biggest threat to mankind since Darth Vader began construction of the second Death Star. You called Chief UN Weapons Inspector Hans Blix an insignificant crybaby when he disagreed with you. You told us that France and Germany and Russia were the axis of weasels, and it was spread throughout all of Rupert Murdoch's no-spin media empire. But we haven't found the weapons, have we? No, not yet. We've been looking pretty damn hard, and we're hearing the rhetoric coming out of every nook and cranny of the Bush administration. We're hearing it from the Ministry of War in Arlington, and we're hearing it from the Ministry of Information on Fox. We're told that Saddam may have buried them. We're told that he may have destroyed them on the eve of the attack, which of course would have made this whole conflict even more illegal than it was to begin with. Now we speculate that crafty old George W. will end up pulling a miracle out of his ass at the last minute so that all of us unpatriotic bozos can hear the I told you so's during election time as the government ignored yet another warning of an attack on the United States. We're speculating as to every possible place that these magical, mythical weapons of mass destruction could be. But ask Tony Blair. The public's beginning to speculate too. They're speculating that they just might not have ever existed in the first place. What an odd and unconventional thought this is. Could it be that Blix in France and Russia and 80% of the world's population was right in the first place? That Hussein wasn't an imminent threat to begin with? That maybe he didn't have these super weapons? That maybe he wasn't hell-bent on world domination? That maybe he wasn't the reincarnation of Adolf Hitler? That's the correlation that President Bush tried to make while standing on the sacred soil of Auschwitz. Isn't it interesting that when Bush stood where the Jews had died, he forgot just who was funding Adolf Hitler in the first place? Could it have been perhaps a Bush? Well, of course it was. It was Prescott Bush who gave money and vital resources to Hitler, from much-needed iron to Zyklon B. They used that to kill those at Auschwitz. So who are you when you support the dogma that America stands for aggression, an America that doesn't believe in diplomacy? What are you when you support an America that can go ahead and wage war whenever it wants with little or no justification? What are you? Perhaps a traitor. Well, it takes one to know one.
I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore!
Trails to you, they're in the skies again. Toxic trails to you, they're messing with our health and with our brain. They say they're testing patterns for the weather. I guess they think that we are not too clever. Toxic trails to you, 'cause they're in the skies again.
Big brother, watching you. Yeah. 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 Big brother, watching you. Yeah.
Once the riot started, it went like a forest fire. It started in a lot of different places at pretty much the same time.
I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore!